Chuck Hagel, the nominee for Defense Secretary, was up on the Hill for his nomination hearings, and he faced some pretty tough, sometimes nasty, I would argue, talk radio style opposition from the Republicans.
You stand by those comments, Senator Hagel?
Well, Senator, I stand by them because I made them. And
were you right? Were you correct in your assessment?
Well, I would defer to the judgment of history to sort that out. But
the committee deserves your judgment as to whether you were right or wrong about the surge.
I'll explain why I made those comments. And
I want to know if you were right or wrong. That's a direct question. I expect a direct answer.
The surge assisted in the objective, but if we review the record a little bit.
Will you please answer the question? Were you correct or incorrect when you said that the surge would be the most dangerous foreign policy blunder in this country since Vietnam? Were you correct or incorrect? Yes or no? The question is, were you right or wrong? That's a pretty straightforward question.
Well,
I would like to answer whether you were right or wrong.
I'm not going to give you a yes or no answer on a lot of things.
Well, let the record show that you refused to answer that question.
All right, so first of all, let's talk tactics here. Mm-hmm. As a person who has done radio talk shows, mm-hmm. that is what I would call the Hannity. McCain gave him the Hannity.
The constant badgering.
The badgering and the taking of a complex issue and boiling it into pretending that it's a yes or no question.
Yeah.
And so basically what we've got, I think, at a meta level is you have the United States Senate now operating basically as a right-wing talk show. Mm-hmm. Trying to make a fool out of, which is crazy, kind of, a Republican senator, a fellow Republican senator. Now, I think this is a teachable moment. I really think this is a hugely important moment about the question of what are the proper policies when thinking about war, when thinking about foreign policy. It's a teachable moment when we think about what is the surge, was it effective, and should we think of it as effective in terms of future international engagements? Does more troops always solve the problem? Let's look at what happened in the Iraq surge. In the Iraq surge, where President Bush put more troops into Iraq in 2007, did it work? I mean, I think in a sense it's a fair question. McCain is asking a fair question. I don't think he's asking it in a fair way, but he's raising the issue. Did the Iraq surge work? And John McCain has tied his legacy to the idea that the Iraq surge has worked. Let's look at some of the data about whether it worked. Let's look at what we know about whether it worked. Bob Woodward had a book about the Bush administration thinking about and how it thought about the Iraq war. And in his book, he found that the biggest factor behind reduced violence in Iraq was, quote, very possibly not the surge, but the ethnic cleansing death squads that the United States supported. Additionally, he uncovered a top secret memo finding that the Sunnis in Iraq systematically were targeted for assassination. Some more data about the Iraq surge, whether it worked or not. Violence, when the surge started, was already decreasing before the surge. In addition, 1,000 plus American soldiers were killed, 1,000, during the surge and after the surge. So this is a teachable moment in the sense, and I think the political context of why we're talking about this is really important. What the Republicans are trying to do, what they see the Hagel nomination as a referendum on whether their ideas about foreign and military policy are right. And their ideas are, when it comes to surges, that sending more troops is the way to prosecute wars, is always the answer when we've made, I would argue, a pretty bad political decision about a war.
I think that you're definitely right. I think that there are people who still want to have that battle over and over again. And I think that in the wake of the war, I think that they had been dealt a pretty strong blow. The American public was disillusioned with the entire thing. Like, it seemed like a grand adventure at first. After 9 or so years, eventually they catch on. And so I think that after a couple years now, I think that they are ready to try to do that again. And that's why we hear the talk about Iran and possible plans to attack them. And I think that they feel like the ground might be a bit more fertile for that sort of attack than it would have been back in, say, 2008, 2009. But I also wonder, in particular in regard to John McCain, I think that he is at the point, and I don't want to seem ageist, but I think that he is stuck on this. I think that he is going to replay this, not just because in the future he'd like us to approach military conflicts with other countries or just conflicts with other countries in a military fashion, but I think that it was such a big part of the last decade, a big part of how people perceive him. And because of the loss in 2008, he lost so much face in front of the American public. I think that he's personally stuck on it.
I agree. He strapped his legacy to it. I mean, he
Exactly.
sees the John McCain legacy as tied to the Iraq surge.
The Iraq surge
Iraq
and
war.
the loss
Right.
in 2000.
Yeah, and I want to take it all the way back to Vietnam. One of the narratives that came out of the Vietnam War was that we lost the war supposedly because our government didn't escalate it enough, didn't allow the troops to do what they supposedly needed to do. It's the old, and I wrote about this in my book, the old one arm tied behind our back notion. This myth that American troops had one arm tied behind their back, as if we didn't napalm enough of Vietnam, as if we didn't kill enough Vietnamese.
There were some trees remaining.
Right,
apparently.
there were apparently too many, right? So it comes back into the Iraq War, that idea. We have to let the troops do what they want to do, let the generals do what they want to do. And we see it in the Afghanistan war, right? The Afghanistan surge. There was a surge under President Obama. Did the Afghanistan surge work? President Obama took the mythology that surges work, escalation works, and he essentially backed a surge in Afghanistan. And the idea is that worked. But did that work? No, it didn't work. In August of 2009, in Afghanistan, insurgents attacked United States and Allied troops approximately 2,700 times. That's pre-surge. In August of 2012, they attacked U.S. forces just shy of 3,000 times. That's 1 point. In August of 2009, insurgents used just under 600 homemade bombs on U.S. forces in Afghanistan. They used just over 600 such bombs on U.S. forces in August of 2012. One other slide will do. Insurgents attacked about 2,000 times in July of 2009. And in July of 2012, just over 3,000 times. Now I want to play a video clip of Bob Woodward. I mentioned him earlier about surges. Because we always go back to when we talk about surges, about escalating wars. You hear presidents say, well, we have to defer to the generals. Hey, listen, I don't want to escalate a war. I'm just listening to what the generals are telling me to do. So when John McCain is asking Chuck Hagel, did you support the surge? What he's trying to do in part is imply that Chuck Hagel wasn't wanting to listen to the commanders on the ground. But is that true? Here's Bob Woodward.
What does General Casey, sitting in Baghdad, think of having additional troops?
He thinks that Baghdad is a troop sump, a place you can put endless numbers of troops in. And he does not want to add force.
The president, who has said in public endless times that he relies on his generals to tell him what they need, is actually going his own way here.
That's right. Now, the records of the Joint Chiefs show that the idea of 5 brigades came from the White House, not from anybody except the White House.
That is a really, really important point. When he says the White House, that's a euphemism for the president, the politicians, the political appointees.
Yeah.
It's not the military, it's not the commanders on the ground. And so there you have Bob Woodward saying, essentially, even the generals didn't support the surge. I just think it's important to remember that what we're seeing now is that the mythology of military escalation, John McCain, the Republican Party, sees Chuck Hagel as a threat to